the more we pull awareness to the fact that we're all connected, that this is something that we're all doing together, and not just us as people, every living thing on this planet or in the universe, we're all connected into the same energy. We're all part of the same whole, and what we do impacts the whole. And what kind of impact do we want to make?
It's time to change the world. It's time for something better. We're telling the stories of people who are changing the world and how you can help. Businesses, nonprofits, artists, and individuals who have found a problem and then created a solution. You'll come away from every episode with action steps you can take to be part of that solution. We can each change the world every single day. Our daily actions have a massive impact, so what will we do about it? We can remake the world, because guess what? We can. Hi everyone, and welcome to We Can Remake the World, a podcast about people who are changing the world and how you can help. For today's episode, we're having another one of our more casual conversations with a friend or artist or someone that we know directly on a personal level who we invite to just join us and explore some of the ideas that we talk about on our show in a bit of a different format. If you're new to our show, you'll notice that in this episode, it's more about the conversation, less about the formality. So we won't dive into takeaways after the interview. We won't propose a challenge for you based on the conversation. It's really just an opportunity for you to sit back and compare your experiences with the experiences of our guest. I think part of what drives us to do this is a belief that each one of us has value to offer each other just by virtue of our experience. Each one of us has wisdom. Each one of us has had challenges that someone else can relate to. So we think it's really valuable to talk with people that are just living their lives the best way they know how and building positivity into their experience as best they can, trying to make a positive impact how and where they can. So it's a little bit of a different conversation than some of our other episodes, but we think just as valuable. So thanks for being here with us. Today, I'm really excited to be speaking with my friend, Kim. Do you know those friends who you can talk about anything with and they just get where you're coming from without you having to explain yourself or try too hard? They always have something to add to whatever you share, and they listen, and you sort of just ride the same wavelength. For me, that's my friend Kim. We've known each other for almost 2 decades now, which is crazy. And we've gone through times of being really close and then times of being a little more distant, but we always seem to find our way back to each other. We always kind of go back into each other's orbit. I love friends like that who you don't necessarily have to speak to on a really regular basis all the time, but you always know they're there and they're for you. And the kind of ebb and flow of the relationship just happens naturally and can kind of play out on its own. Kim keeps me sane and has kept me sane in some of the most difficult times that I've experienced. And she's that friend for me where nothing is ever off limits. I hope that every one of us is fortunate enough to have a friend like this who always has our backs and is always there to hear us out on both the best days and the most challenging days. Kim also happens to be one of the most thoughtful and self-aware people that I know. She gives everything in her life a lot of intention and consideration, and she always inspires me with how she thinks about our world. She's got such an amazing mind, and I love the way she talks about whatever we're discussing. Kim's a mom. She's a songwriter and writer. She's getting her master's degree right now and working at the same time in the middle of a pandemic. In short, she's one of those superheroes of the world, one of those super moms. She's an incredibly gifted person, both as a musician and teacher, and just as a human with a really active and curious mind. I wanted to invite Kim to join us on the show to explore some of the ideas that we touch upon and to just sort of flow and see where the conversation takes us. I think it's so important for us to be able to check in with each other and compare notes about how we're keeping ourselves in a positive place and what we're experiencing, and also to share our thoughts on the world around us and have a dialogue around that, and a dialogue around what we can do to keep our heads on straight and contribute to the positive out there, especially during challenging times. Kim and I spoke recently, and we ended up talking about everything you can think of, from raising kids to taking baby steps toward living more sustainably to how to change the world every day. I hope you recognize yourself in Kim and in her experiences. Thanks again for being here with us today. Great. So I have my buddy Kim with me today. Kim, how long have we known each other?
Oh no. 20 years? Is that possible?
Oh my gosh. Really? We have known each other a long time. And what's cool and kind of crazy is we became friends when we were, when I was a freshman in high school, when we were both in high school. And even before that, the woman who ended up marrying your brother was my babysitter when I was a kid.
That's so crazy.
It is crazy. Grew up with this person in my life, and then she married your brother.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. So let's start with a little bit about you. Where do you live? Where are you from? And what do you do?
Okay, I have a dog climbing around behind me here. He's coming to say hello.
Something. Yeah, I was like, is it a child? Is it an animal?
So who am I? Okay, so I'm Kim. I'm from, this is for a person who moved around a little bit as a kid, I always find it kind of a tough question to answer, but I would say I am from Michigan, and now I live in Denver, Colorado, and I'm actually here doing my master's right now. That's what brought us out this way.
What are you studying?
I'm doing my master's in vocal performance.
Nice. Yeah. So, I know this, but for everyone else, you are a singer, a songwriter, and not just a singer of any kind, one kind of music. You are studying opera, as you said. You sing a lot of jazz and pop and...
Yeah. In fact, the question, what do you do? I'm always like, well, I'm a musician, I think is the easiest, most broad way to say it. But I also work at a church in a city called Aurora that's really close to Denver. I direct a choir there, and then I work with their kind of Sunday morning music. And at grad school, I'm also the graduate teaching assistant, which means I kind of assist the faculty with putting together schedules. And I also get to teach some voice lessons there as well, which is fun.
What I think is so cool about you is that you have so many different kind of plugins into music. You've sung and written in so many different styles. You're studying opera. You used to do musical direction for musical theater. You've taught voice lessons to every kind of singer. And I don't know, I just feel like you're so well-rounded with music in a way that not a lot of people I know are. And I just think that's so cool about you.
That's kind. Thank you. I just love all aspects of it. I feel really lucky that I've had so many opportunities to get in and around it in so many different ways. And yeah, I love so many different kinds of music. So to be able to work in so many different kinds of music is really fulfilling. And I think my personality is one that I like a lot of variety. And so I've been really blessed with the opportunities that I've had and grabbed to just enjoy that variety.
So what I'd like to ask you is kind of a big question, especially sort of at the front end of a conversation like this, which is a little more casual, but what is something about our world that inspires you, and what makes you feel hopeful?
That is a big question. I think that right away I'm drawn to the fact that I think people are in a new kind of awareness right now where there's more information available to us so that we sort of just have more of a global awareness than we have in the past. But it also seems like humanity has reached this point on a grand scale where we're more in touch with kind of our roots and where we've come from and what we're dealing with. And we're starting to tackle trauma and human rights and I don't really remember my parents' generation hearing adults talk in the way that I hear people talk now about healing, and that's something that super gives me hope for the future. And I also want to say I think Gen Z gets such so much rag. Everybody's always down on Gen Z, it seems like, but I really believe that Gen Z have super X-ray, like truth goggles. Like they just can see through everything, you know? And not only that, but they're so caring and they're so loving, and they don't have sort of the same, we sort of grew up with this like 90s, early 2000s mentality that they were like these groups of people and they never mix, and you know, bully mentality was almost glorified. Don't you think that there was a little bit of a glorification of like meanness when we were kids? And now that seems to be going away, and I'm so grateful for that. And I really have faith in the upcoming generation of kids.
No, I think that's really true. I mean, I think we saw a lot of like the cool kids were the kids who did anything to be popular or successful, which they were inevitably mean, but success was like the ultimate goal. And I also think like self-destruction was a big part of the culture that we were given when we were
Absolutely.
like coming up in the 90s and the early 2000s, where like every teen or college movie is about drinking yourself silly and harming yourself, and it's like cool and funny to like be super unhealthy from an emotional level or a physical level. And I think that's been changing. And I agree with you. I think like my nephew is a freshman in college now, and he's like, why would I drink? It's really bad for me. It makes me do silly things, makes me make poor decisions. What's the fun? What's the benefit? And I'm like, yes, like you got there so much sooner than I did. And I hope that continues. And I love what you said about just like building up the positive in the younger generation, never focusing on what people want to criticize. Like, what good does that do?
Right.
So do you think that there's opportunities that have come from lockdown that have kind of fed this tendency toward self-awareness? And like something we talk about a lot on the podcast is like, we have to know where we are and we have to face the truth of our situation to actually make meaningful change and move forward. And I agree with you that this kind of like self-awareness and this cultural awareness has grown so much. And yeah, I just wonder if you think like lockdown has fed into that in any way. And
I definitely do. I think one of the things that, you know, one of the big pieces of lockdown was isolation, right? And being isolated, even with like kind of your unit at home, I think we all had an opportunity to, number one, slow down. You know, there wasn't running off to do this and that all the time. We weren't scattered in all directions. And then the other thing is we had an opportunity to experience what it was like without our regular everyday human interactions outside of our homes. And I think that, you know, for a lot of people that provided an opportunity to really go inward. And not only do I think it provided that opportunity to go inward, but it provided some space to deal with things. And that's not always pretty, right? Like, I don't want to necessarily focus on kind of the negative side of the lockdown, but it's not always pretty to like dig down deep and get into the stuff that hurts or the stuff that needs to be released or needs to be looked at. And so I think there's been a lot of that this last year. And I don't have in my mind a theory about how that kind of links into the fact that we've had this huge year of, you know, social uproar in terms of paying more attention to the plight of Black lives in our country and really in the world, but in our Western culture in particular. I don't really know how those two tie in, but I do think that like it gave us a chance to slow down and say, hey, here's something that we can talk about and we can do something about this. And this is something that, you know, we're seeing and we're passionate about. And I think that time and space is something that in this like fast-paced, consumer-driven, success-driven life that we all need to find, and we all kind of had an opportunity. We were handed it on a silver platter, you know, whether we wanted it or not, it was there.
Yeah, it was sort of this opportunity, like you said, to understand who we are without that stuff that keeps us going every day. And for so many people, there was a major disruption in work. Some people lost work. Some people, their work life completely changed. And when change on that scale happens, like, reflection is inevitable, I think. And like you said, it's not always pretty. It's not always easy, certainly. But if we can take that opportunity and do our best to take advantage of it with a positive perspective of like, okay, what is this giving me? Like, what does this help me understand about myself? How does this make me stronger in some way? How can I make better choices in some way as a result of all this? Then there's benefit, even
Absolutely.
if it is, hard. And it has been hard. I mean, you have 2 little ones. Like, how have you stayed centered and sane while being in grad school, working, having, elementary school age kids at home? Like how have you kept yourself kind of calm and getting through each day as best you can? And some days are better than others, but what have you found as tools to kind of support you?
Well, to be real, have been some days that have been easier than others, I mean, realistically, not every day is going to be like the best day, right?
Yeah.
And this has been a really challenging year for me and the kids, but we have got to spend so much time together. And what's kind of funny, and this is an aside, and then I'll come back to your actual question, but when I was living in Detroit, I was doing a lot, let's put it that way. And so most days during the week, I would come home and put my kids to bed, and I would take them to school in the morning, and I'd be with them on the weekends. But it got to the point where, I was like, if I'm going to have time with my kids after school, I've got to make a change, and went to grad school thinking like, cool, I'll be in school while they're in school. Like, afterwards we get to hang out and I can be the one who gets to take them to their after school stuff. We'll have so much time to spend together. And little did I know that we would be at school together at home on the computers. So sanity things, like what did I do to keep sane, and what did we do to kind of mitigate the pandemic blues, I guess was your question. So I definitely started picking up the phone and calling people more, making time, socially to just pick up the phone and call. We had regular, like, anytime the weather was good enough to be outside, we had regular, like, let's get outside intervals. And actually, I got a pandemic dog. Some people got pandemic babies.
So did I. Yeah.
That's right, you did. Yeah. I was like, well, we wanted a dog. Now is probably a good time. Plus, it helps so much to... He has been great for our family during this. Just, another lovable creature in the house and something to do. I certainly had to figure out ways to unplug me personally, because all the computer time, I wouldn't even realize in the midst of it how it was getting to me. It was like I get to the end of the day and there'd be a certain level of fatigue that I was like, wow, I've literally been sitting at the computer all day. Like, I can't believe how tired I am. And then so unplugging and finding some space to just go and be by myself and let my mind clear, kind of meditative space, if you will, without being really formally that. And then I think ups and downs of different things, like maybe I can sum all that up under the umbrella of I really actively have been taking time to dig into my stuff during this time. And that actually has helped make it better, because it's like I'll see this thing that comes up in me, this reaction to like the kids or this reaction to what's going on in the world, and I'm like, whew, that was intense. Like, where did that come from? Like, why is that there? It's like, okay, these strong emotions don't come from nowhere. It's not this person that's eliciting this response from me. It's triggering something inside me that's making me react this way, right? And so starting to like take a moment and just really be aware of where that's coming from has allowed me to say like, oh, here's this piece of past that I need to kind of dig into and deal with, or here's this like area of insecurity that, you know, I got from certain messages that I need to maybe take a look at and kind of love myself through that, right?
I mean, do you think that you would have been able to sort of have this level of self-reflection and like this ability to invest in yourself in that way without the lockdown? Like, is that a silver lining that we've kind of already called it out, but just something to encourage in all of us, like the ability to self-reflect cannot be underestimated, especially in a world as fast-paced as ours has been in the recent past. So like, do you feel like you would have been able to do this without these circumstances?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not. What I will say is that these circumstances, I learned a lot. And a lot of it was that self-reflective time. But even like helping my kids with their school, all of the different like programs on the computers that we've had to learn to use, just being at home day after day with my family is something that I'm the kind of person that staying home for a full day in the past would bum me out because I just was a get up and go kind of person. So to that end, like, no, I don't think that I would have had the same learning opportunities and the same space for self-reflection and opportunity to grow in those ways without this having happened.
So speaking about the little ones a little bit more, you know, being a mom in this world with young kids, like how does that inform your point of view on the world and the world that we're building essentially for them?
Yeah. I will be totally honest that most of what it's influencing for me right now is a little narrowed in on healing like trauma that's been passed down. So one thing that I am super aware of right now and really interested in from like a reading perspective and everything is ancestral trauma. And the simpler way to say that is just like what we pass on in terms of trauma and what's been passed on. And some people kind of hear that and they're like, that's a little woo-woo for me. But if you think about it, just from a psychological perspective, a scientific perspective even, if you will, if a parent is triggered emotionally in certain situations, the child is there to experience that. If my kid spills a glass of milk and I freak out and scream, and then later down the road, they're on their own as an adult and they spill a glass of milk, what are they going to do? Probably they're going to freak out and scream. Where did I learn that when a glass of milk spills that you freak out and scream? Well, that came from my mom. Where did that come from? Her dad? Where did that come from? You know, so just that's a piece that certainly I'm really aware of. And then, I'd say another big piece is just thinking environmentally. I think that our generation, at least for me, I can say when I was young, thinking about having kids, I was like, oh, that wouldn't be cool of me to like bring kids into this mess, you know? It's funny being in college right now, I hear, similar sentiments from the young people there. And I was like, well, just, wait and see what happens. But I don't want to know that I've left them more mess, at least for me in my personal sphere, what I can do to try and not add to the mess is certainly on my mind, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah, no, I think that's such an important side of it to bring up, sort of that emotional side of things, because I think a lot of our short-sightedness when it comes to the environment and when it comes to how we treat each other is short-sightedness that comes from how we treat ourselves, which a lot of the times we learn from people around us when we're young, like families or influences from the media or from our teachers, or it's like that's an essential part of the mix, which I certainly feel like I don't always think of at first, but it's a huge piece. And there's something you and I have talked about, which is like every generation kind of has the opportunity to break the cycle in some way.
Yeah.
As far as inheriting self-destructive habits or habits which are destructive for others. And what you said made me think for the first time, like that's true on an emotional level, which is how I tend to think about that side of things, but also on a physical level. Like each generation has the opportunity to break the destructive habits of the past,
Right.
like as far as how we treat each other emotionally and spiritually, and also how we treat the world and our environment. So like if we can just have the courage to have enough self-awareness and commitment to understand what's contributed to things from the past and then make changes, like we can do it. But we have to be the ones to stand up and say, like, we're not going to pass this on. This like short-term thinking, which has caused so much trouble in the world, this obsession with profit and wealth, which, by choosing to create new kinds of business and new kinds of communities, we can overcome.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I love the way that you broadened that, because I hadn't thought of it that way either before. But it's all kind of the same umbrella of we have a choice to choose what we're going to pass on.
Yeah. I just got chills. I think that's so cool just to think about it. Like that way of thinking can be applied to everything. Like emotionally and in our families and in our culture and in the business world, in the art world. It's like every generation has a choice as far as what they pass on. They can pass on what's come before, good or bad, or they can be super deliberate and intentional about what they pass on, which can then just get better and better.
Yeah, I think too that there's something that has kind of been brought into my awareness recently is just sort of the victim mentality. Like we can choose to feel like we're victims of what's been passed on to us. And it's not to say that isn't valid, but what is it doing to help, to kind of sit in that space of we're victims of the choices of the previous generations? What does that solve?
Yeah, no,
right?
Like blame or finger pointing doesn't get us anywhere. It never has. So it's like we can acknowledge what the truth is and what the situation is that we want to make change regarding. But you're right, like spending energy on, well, it's their fault, so we're all screwed because of them. It's like, well, that doesn't empower us. That doesn't tell us the choices that we have to make. I think that's a really good point. I know your kids are still so young. Like your son is 9 now? No.
Oh my gosh, they're about to be 7 and 9, which is mind blowing.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy.
I know.
Do you feel like there's things that they're exposed to now that previous generations weren't, as far as like thinking about the world, thinking about the environment? I feel like when we grew up, there were actually a lot of TV shows and movies where it was like super environmentally conscious. And I think that's part of why our generation was a little bit different, even if not,
Agreed.
quite as much yet as it could have been or could be. But, how do you see their little minds like wrapping around the environment? And do you see that yet?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. They're already tackling like pretty tough issues. And I mean, you can pick at school standards and things like that, but teachers are just so good at being able to communicate things on a level that kids understand. And I, in my household, when things come up that are a little wild and crazy, we have conversations about them. My kids are aware of what's going on socially. They're aware of what's going on politically. They're aware of what's going on environmentally. And they have thoughts. They have opinions. Their opinions are things that change, which I think is good too. You take more information and your opinion changes, right? Like we could all learn from that probably. But I do think that the educational system is doing well to teach kids. But I also think that as parents, we can have conversations with our kids that seem like adult topics in a kid way.
Absolutely.
And also present it in a way that's like, what do you think about this? So this is kind of what's going on, and this is what these people are saying, and this is what these people are saying. This is what science says. What do you think about this?
I love that. And I think it raises another really great point. Like, I think with our generation, sort of like millennials, so to speak, like there was this kind of tendency that was from a little bit the past of protecting kids. Like, we don't talk about that with our kids because we don't want them to be worried about it, or it's just not a kid-friendly conversation, that term. But I feel like what's behind that? Like, what benefit is there in trying to like close our kids' eyes and ears to the world around them until, oh, okay, you're 18. Now you can handle what's really going on. Good luck. It's like, yeah, exactly. Like, have fun dealing with that. Like, but like you said, like finding a way to encourage thinking around it and conversation around it in young people is, I think, only going to help them like plug into the world as they're growing. And I think part of what we're seeing in Gen Z and like kids like Greta Thunberg in Sweden and like these leaders is we couldn't kind of protect them because they had the internet, so they could find out on their own if we weren't going to tell them about it. So it's like we might as well help them to have these conversations so that we're helping to shape their reaction to it, so that it's not just the internet and them, it's the internet and them and then people around them who care about them and can sort of foster a positive way of thinking, an empowering way of thinking, so that they feel like they can be part of a solution in whatever way they're inspired to.
Yeah, I think too, we have to be careful about not programming our kids to just think what we think.
Yeah.
Because even if you do that, probably at some point they're going to rebel against at least parts of it, right? And so I think a parenting awareness moment is, am I giving my kid just one side of the story because that's what I want them to hear? And that's challenging. I also think that parents having conversations with their kids gets kids having conversations with each other too. And it gets kids kind of like, oh, well, so-and-so says, ba-ba-ba. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you think about that? You know, one thing that Finn has really picked up on in this last year, he is very aware of prejudice. Like he is it's something that when he sees situations, he's trying to figure out if there's some prejudice involved.
Wow.
And I'm like, wow, thank God. Always look at that, you know, always.
Yeah, no, that'll serve you your whole life.
Your whole life.
Yeah.
And it allow you to stand in a place of like service for others as well. And it'll also give you a chance to stop and ask yourself like, hey, why am I coming to this conclusion? Am I coming to it because this is what I really think? Or am I prejudiced in some way? So he's a
There's
special
something
kid.
that, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, your kids are both incredibly special. They're like such bright little spirits and they're amazing.
Well, that's great to hear. Of course I think that because they're my kids. I'm supposed to. And I don't know. I love them. I think they're great.
Very special. So kind of along these lines a little bit, I love what we were talking about as far as just the opportunity kind of each generation has to break cycles. But what do you think contributes to us kind of getting trapped and making the same mistakes? Like, how can we break these cycles? Like, especially on a societal level where it's like we've seen these past generations who we perceive as having done such destruction. So how can we really make sure that these ways of thinking, these ways of relating to our culture and our ways of doing business can shift? Like, what keeps us stuck and how can we overcome it?
That's a really good question. And if I had like the ultimate answer, I would tell everyone. But I think that there are three kind of key things that came up in my mind when you were asking. One is definitely a sense of awareness. The more awareness we cultivate in ourselves and the more awareness we cultivate of the world, the more we'll be able to see what's going on and how many different ways forward there are. The second thing that came up for me was priorities. Thinking about truly what are our priorities? Is our priority to amass the most wealth that we can as an individual? Is our priority to create a world that is kind to all people, kind to all creatures, kind to all living things? So setting our priorities and living from those priorities. And then the third thing, I'm going to be quite honest with you, I completely forgot, which is very like hashtag Kim. My mind got wandering. But I think, pride was the last one. So stubbornness and pride, I think, an unwillingness to learn, an unwillingness to admit that we're wrong, an unwillingness to let something go that, we have chosen, thinking that this is the way, this is the thing, and it not serving us, not serving the greater whole, and being willing to be like, well, I guess I let that one go and go back and try again. But I think prioritizing what's important, letting go of sort of like the pride and the stubbornness that quite honestly is natural to most of us, and cultivating awareness to kind of know when those things are going on, and how your actions are serving your goals.
I think that's so good. Something I love about the awareness part is I think we have sort of a new opportunity. In the past, a company that was profiting off of horrible labor practices in some part of the world, they could keep it hidden very easily. Mm-hmm. And nobody was held accountable because very few people knew what was actually going on. Whereas now we have such visibility into the impacts our actions are having on the environment, on other people. There are people with cell phones in every country in the world who can prove, hey, this is my experience, and I work for such and such company, and they are allowing this. We can show that they know about this and that it's happening. So then anybody who finds out about it through the internet can, take action, call for accountability. That's kind of unprecedented. Mm-hmm. Like, until the internet, we never had an opportunity like that, which I think should give us hope, because it's like, hey guys, we've only had this awareness, this access to this level of awareness for a little while now, mm-hmm. like a couple decades. So let's have some compassion for ourselves if things haven't changed as quickly as we'd like, because we've only had this awareness for a little while now. Mm-hmm. And then let's use this awareness to not create like guilt or like self-deprecation, like at a cultural level, or just like continuously point blame like we were talking about earlier. And like, let's use it to empower ourselves and to hold these companies and each other accountable.
Agreed. I think too, there needs to be a sense and an awareness of how we're all connected. If that's not there, then you're just an agent of yourself. So, as a parent, as a teacher, as a person who works in the corporate world, as a person who broadcasts their voice, to the world, the more we pull awareness to the fact that we're all connected, that this is something that we're all doing together, and not just us as people, every living thing on this planet or in the universe or beyond, we're all connected into the same energy. We're all part of the same whole, and what we do impacts the whole. And what kind of impact do we want to make?
I agree so much. I think that's so important. And as you were talking about kind of the three things that you see, I was thinking, okay, well, what balances that? Like, what can we incorporate more in ourselves to help counteract some of those things? And it's like compassion, a sense of interconnectedness, intentionality, and values. You were talking about, with priorities, if we can have every choice come from intentionality and from a sense of what are our values. If we ask that before we take any action, I mean, everything will change. Like, because I think more and more of us are coming to the understanding that we are all in this together, and it's time to make meaningful change, because we know that our world right now is not sustainable. It's just not on so many levels. So if we can really make that commitment to bring intentionality and values to everything we do in the world, then everything can and will change. Mm-hmm. And I just think those are some of the qualities that, if we just continue to consciously build them into the way we think about every aspect of life, like, we'll just set ourselves on such an amazing path. And this world can become so amazing. Like, I don't know, I see so much potential at every level of society if we do those things, if we build intentionality and compassion and interconnectedness into everything. Like, we could rethink every aspect of what we know of as the world. And yeah.
I totally agree. I totally have hope and believe that as the consciousness of the world continues to elevate, that we're headed in a good direction. It could really be like a new place to live at some point.
Absolutely.
I look forward to seeing that unfold, and I look forward to being a part of it.
Yeah. And if every one of us can say that too, like, hey, I believe this world can be better than it is, and I can't wait to be part of it.
Yeah.
If we don't say anything else but that, we're already in a much better place than we were any other day and any other time in the past.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think that there are days that you can step back and take a look at things. I remember I sort of watched a little bit of news. There are days when the world can look really dark and you can feel really negative about it. And you can be surrounded by people who are like, what have we become? And everything's falling apart. And I think to have a day like that every now and then where you're like, bleh, is totally understandable. And I think not always being in the most positive headspace is a thing that happens.
Yeah.
But I think if, like you said, I agree. I think if overall we're like, no, everything's not perfect yet, but everything is moving in the direction that is going to make things better, make things more livable, make us feel safer. And how can I be a part of that? Absolutely. I absolutely agree.
I almost think it's similar to kind of the work that we do on ourselves to move on from emotional struggles, emotional wounds. It's like when you grow your awareness of yourself and your like emotional habits and like you start to see yourself for who you really are and like what's really going on in your life, it can feel really scary and big. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all these things I didn't see about myself before. This is awful. I am awful. How can I make this better? It's like, just speaking from my own experience, you go through phases like that as an individual. And I think you can apply that to like our greater experience as a global community too. It's like, it's just a fact of our awareness growing.
Absolutely.
And inevitably, as our awareness grows, we're going to see a lot more of the bad stuff, the rough stuff, the things that we don't want to be. And with technology and access to information, like that stuff's going to pop up more and more, and we're going to have to face some difficult truths. But that awareness can then move us, with time out of like a despairing place and like a wow, we just suck place to like, well, so what do we want to do about it? Like, just like as an individual, it's like, man, I am not open to people around me emotionally in a way that I want to be. I am cutting myself off, or I have these habits of like fear when it comes to love and relationships or whatever it is. And it's like, you go through that phase of just like, everything sucks and I'm wrong. And how do I figure this out? And then you get through it and you find a way through if you stay committed to it and you believe in yourself and you have support from those around you. And then you can like build a whole new self. Like,
you hit the L word. And if I was to go back and just completely like rewrite everything that I've said, like that's the most important thing, right? I mean, if we're all living from a place of love, I not to be cliche, but that literally changes everything. Yeah. It changes the way you look at everyone around you. It changes the way you interact with your environment. It changes the way that you interact with yourself. Like, love is the most powerful force of change.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I think we've seen proof of that. Like, somebody like Gandhi, who was like, I believe in the oppressor's ability to love so much that I don't think they can sustain hurting me and my people if we don't fight back. That was his gamble. He was like, I believe that they can love us as long as we don't show them the callousness and the violence that they're showing us. So let's let them beat us. Let's let them kill us. And that's what they did. And that is ultimately what like totally changed the course of an entire country. And it's like, I agree with you that it's like, it can sound cliche to say peace and love will fix everything. But like there's evidence of it. And like, if you have any experience of changing your habits of thinking and relating to others from a more judgmental place or kind of a harsher place to a more loving place, you experience it. And if we can just, Yes,
on the interpersonal level, just taking a moment to like stand in love and speak from love changes relationships. On this kind of theme, if my kids look back at me and they're like, yeah, mom was crazy and she did this and that and the other, as long as they know that I loved them or that I would have, I'm getting choked up, dang it, that I would have done anything for them within my power to show them that I loved them. That doesn't need to mean like the deepest levels of self-sacrifice either, because I have to have something to give them. But if they know that I loved them, then I feel like, okay, I did a good job.
So you spoke about some of the choices that you make kind of to not cause harm, or to just like some of the small action steps kind of we can take in daily life. Like, what are some of the action steps that you've kind of taken upon yourself as far as like, okay, this is what I can do to have a positive impact in this way on the environment, or in this way as even a teacher on an emotional level? Like, what are some of those small commitments that you feel you've made for yourself?
Sure. So, I really try to buy responsibly as much as I can. What that means is a much bigger conversation. But I try to support smaller businesses. I try to buy organic fruits and vegetables, knowing that there's less opportunity for pesticides to be not only ingested by us, but also ingested by the earth. And when it comes to waste, we try to be on top of recycling. We try to limit the amount of plastic, particularly plastic waste that we add. There's a lot more that I feel like I want to do kind of in those areas environmentally, and I'm kind of baby stepping my way. I look at the idea of like no waste living, and I'm like, whoa, I'm so far from that. You know what I mean? So I think you have to compare like, okay, also we're not like filling the landfill with, stuff. So anyway, I would also say in my working life that, I try to choose gigs and choose jobs when they come up where I feel like the message that we're sending out is something that is positive and loving, and the interpersonal relationships that I have, I'm intentional about those. One of the things that I've done pretty consistently since I started working is teaching private lessons one-on-one. And I was talking to a friend who's also a private music teacher. So building up a voice is one thing. Of course, there's merit in that. Building up a person is so much more important, really. So that's definitely kind of intentional relationships. And within that also then with my kids, the intentionality there, I'd say that that's a big piece. And then drawing it even a little more inward, dealing with my stuff. And when I say that, what I mean is healing. Healing myself is helping to heal the world.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think if we all took that attitude that it's not selfish, selfish, sure, okay, it is selfish. Selfish isn't always bad. It can also be a selfless act, or something that has more reach than just us, I guess is the way to say that, to heal our own stuff.
Yeah, you said it yourself earlier. I think it's like, I don't have as much to give if I'm not taking care of myself. I think you said it in the context of the kids, but it's like, if we aren't able to kind of remove our own blocks to being our fuller selves, our more loving selves, our more sort of empowered, purposeful, fulfilled selves, then we don't have as much to give. Because, we're still kind of trying to figure our own stuff out. And so
if we're always operating out of stress and burnout, we're just going to spread more stress and burnout, right?
Yeah, totally. Just as we kind of circle around the finish, like, I'd love to ask you about where you see the greatest potential for us to make positive change individually and collectively, just whatever comes to mind.
So I think the way that I am looking at things right now is that our interpersonal interactions actually make so much more of an impact than we give them credit for. That's where I think the most impact is. Getting off of social media. And I know it's hard right now. We're still in the midst of a pandemic, but you stand outside on your balcony and talk to your neighbor on their balcony, or you wear a mask and talk to somebody outside, whatever. But actually having conversations with people, and conversations like what you and I are having, like also being able to have conversations that are not necessarily comfortable, and being willing to share your opinions and not guard them with pride and fear that somebody might poke hole in your theory. Those interpersonal interactions, I think, are the most long-lasting and really have the most widespread, because that interaction affects another interaction, and it spreads out that way. And I also think that in our professional lives, we are given opportunities for not only personal interactions, like face-to-face, but we also send a ripple effect out through what we create. And so making choices to produce, manage, teach, whatever you do in a way that reflects the values that you have, the way that you would want your great aunt to be treated, the way that you would want your child to be treated, your mom, treat your consumers that way, your customers that way, your clients that way, your students that way.
Wow, yeah, treating your customers the way you would want another company to treat your great aunt as a customer.
Yeah.
Like that kind of thinking.
Yeah. I mean, and not to oversimplify things, but that's really it. There's empathy, there's love. Empathy, I think, though. Empathy is huge.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Kim.
Yeah.
This has been...
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too. It was a really nice way to start the day, actually.
Good.
And I forgot several times that we were recording, which is always a good sign.
Yeah, totally. Me too.
Talking to a friend.
Yeah, just chatting.